Living my bucolic life, 3 out 3 city stripes. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sell and spin, and will the horses in to the barn, and time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful our houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello everybody, welcome back. It's a chilly late spring morning, or actually it's afternoon. What time is it? It's 6:14 in the evening. I'm getting started late today. But I'm going to be making a cute little warm weather dress. And this is the pattern. It's a simplicity pattern. It looks like it's a sundress options over here. They have a couple variations. They have this one, which has the straps tie behind your neck like a halter. And this one where they're just the standard going over your shoulder straps. And then there's this one which has shoulders and sleeves and a collar. But it's the same dress, it's just changing the top part. So I'm going to do the one with the sleeves and the collar just because, you know, my upper arms aren't the most beautiful at my phase in life, and they are not what I want to emphasize. We'll just put it that way. So this calls for cotton, batik, chambray, gauze, basically lightweight, cottony type fabrics. And I have this daisy-ish looking pattern, which looks lovely. This is just a cotton calico, and I think I have enough. I believe I bought 3 yards, and I believe that that is close to what the pattern calls for, but if I'm a little short, I might change some things on the skirt. So let me think about that. But I believe I have 3 yards, so we will make it work. I did pre-wash it on hot, and I pre-dried it on hot. So my questioning is I have not measured it after I dried it, because if there's any shrinkage, it's in there now. But the one thing is, this is a fairly fitted Princess See-Me looking bodice up here. And I do not see that it is a pick your cup size. Let's take a peek in here at the pattern real quick. We have 3 different lengths of skirt. And we do not have a cup size. Sometimes on patterns that are princess seams, they do this lovely thing where they will have different princess seamed pattern pieces based on your cup size. And actually it was warm or cold, so I put a sweater on, but this dress that I did not too long ago, that's kind of a double-breasted side zipper dress, it was one of them. So if you have this pattern and you want an easy way to adjust the side, the cup size is just to substitute this pattern piece over and draw it in. But I digress. When I get to that point, I'll look at the piece and see what we need to do, because usually they make their pattern pieces based on like a B cup size. So yeah, let me go ahead and get started cutting out these pieces, because that top's a little bit different. Who knows how it will turn out. So as I am cutting this out, there are 3 different lengths for the skirt. The shortest one is above the knee. It's a little short skirt. The middle length one, which is on the model here, comes just below the knee, and then this one is very long. So you can pick whichever one. I am going to go with this mid-length on me. It is 42 inches, I believe. Yeah, just over 42 inches from the base of your neck down, and I like that length. I held it up to myself, and what I do is When I want to see how long it's going to be, I put a little clothespin on a tape at that length and then hold it up to the base of my neck and stand in front of a mirror, and then that way I can tell really carefully where that's going to hit. So I like that, so I'm going to be cutting out the mid-length version here. Okay, so I've got everything cut out. There are a lot of pieces with this. The bodice, there's a different piece for every little quadrant of it, so lots of pieces. There's plackets up the front and everything like that. I want to deal with this bodice side front piece here right now because I need to do a couple things. I'm looking at this and you can see there's not much ease up here. This is fairly fitted, as it should be if it's going to be a sundress, because the last thing you want when you have a sundress is to have a loose top. You know, you want that to be snug. But because it's snug, I need to make a couple little adjustments. First of all, I need to lower the bust, you know, as we do. And I also need to give myself about an inch more curviness here. So this should be the only piece that I need to deal with. So what I'm going to do is line it up with the grain line, you know, on the straight with one of my grids underneath here. And the parts that do work, I'm going to leave alone. The parts that don't work, I'm going to fix. So I am assuming, hang on a second, let me strategize this. Okay, so I am looking at their finished bust. This is the size I'm doing, size 16 here, okay? Get all that circled up. And their finished bust is 41.5. Their finished waist is 32.5. I can get into that. It's going to be snug. Okay? That is based on a body measurement of a 38-inch bust and a 30-inch waist. Okay? My actual bust is closer to 40. Sometimes bigger than 40. It depends, you know? Pick a day on the calendar, it's different. So if I'm going to give myself the same amount of ease that they have here, I need to make it bigger. And I'm thinking that what I'm going to do is just add ½ an inch to this piece in general, just across the board, add ½ an inch in width. Now, that means I'm going to have to change the facing piece that's going to go along with it up here. And down here, the skirt that attaches to it, well, it's very full and it's pleated. So I think I can make up that ½ inch difference inside the pleat down here, and you know, that'll be fine. Actually, I got my weights, but before I do that, I'm just going to draw some lines. So first of all, I am going to follow the grain line and just draw lines straight down, okay? Now I can kind of tell where the apex is because it's the point that reaches out the furthest, which looks about here. Again, typically my apex is an inch lower. So I need to draw a line across the top somewhere above this point, and I am just going to pick 1 inch above it, which is right about here. Yeah, we're just going to start with that, and then I'll blow it out after. But you know what? I'm going to do one more line. The second line I'm going to do is going to be a dotted line that goes here to the apex, so I can keep track that they're totally separate. Okay, I am cutting all the way up here. All the way up. Now, could I have just cut a larger size over here? Yes, I could have, but I wasn't thinking that far ahead at the time. You know, if you wanted to cut 2 sizes bigger, because it's about ¼ inch for every size. If you wanted to cut just 2 sizes bigger just on this part, you can do that, you know. So what I got to do is get a piece of tissue paper put in here, and I'm moving this out. But before I actually attach it to my scrap of tissue paper, I'm going to cut those. But first, let me get this set over here. Okay, so what I also am going to do is that straight line I drew at 1 inch above where the fullest point is, I'm going to need to attach that. So at this point, if I just lay it where it was, I can see that the top of this piece is 1/4 inch from the top. So I am blowing it out 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to put my ruler where I can see where that mark is. And that looks like about 1/2 inch to me right there. Okay, so let me put another piece of tape here. Okay, so when I go to cut this, I'm just going to kind of blend from where the highest point here is and just kind of blend it to where these positions look like they would be a nice blend. Okay, so I'll be cutting that off. Now, if I put the bottom of this piece down here, remember we need to lower the bust. So I need to take a point. Let me just draw a line on here that is below the bust, a 90 degree right there. Okay. So where this line is, I'm going to put a piece of tape down here to hold it in place. I'm going to lower the bust by 1 inch, so I need to fold this down and fold it back up at the 1/2 inch mark, okay? Because 1/2 inch plus 1/2 inch is 1 inch. So at this point, the fullest point here is now 1 inch lower than it used to be. And I'm just going to put a piece of tape here to hold that fold. I am just going to put my piece of tape here to hold all that together. And now this looks like a real mess, but what I have is 1 inch added to my girth because I have 1 inch on, 1/2 inch on one side, 1/2 inch on the other side. So that adds up to a full inch. And I have my low bust adjustment, and I've done all of that without changing this length. And if that length is not changed, then this should match up to the center bodice pieces without any trouble. So now I'm just coming along, trimming things so that they kind of blend from one piece to the next. And that is my new bodice front piece. But I think this is going to work. And so now all of my pattern pieces are cut out. I remeasured my fabric and I have 3.5 yards, so I should be fine because that is exactly what it calls for. So I plan on just laying out and cutting my fabric pretty much according to the same layout that they have here. And you can see there are, for this view, there are 13 pieces. Lots of little pieces. So I'm just going to take my time, lay it out, and then I will be back. Almost forgot, I need to adjust this facing piece really quick. So I got it out, and if I just stagger this a little bit, I can see that it's right here at this point where I need to add the 1/2 inch. So let's see here. I'm going to do it exactly like I have here. If I cut it right there, get my little scrap of tissue paper here. And I should do it so I'm looking at the right side. That would be better, wouldn't it? Yes, it would. All right, putting this here. I'm going to tape the scrap on. And get this piece here. And I'm going to set a ruler according to this line where it is because it kind of swoops. But where this point is, at that tip, according to my ruler, just giving myself 1/2 inch, putting this piece on, and there I go. So now I can trim this, and this piece should be the same as this one, but this piece doesn't just end here. There's a center front it's also going to cover. But so let's see. This will go to here, and then this is a seam, and then there's where the center front goes. So it's going to work. It's all fine. I got to put these away, and now I will cut out my fabric. Now with a big piece of cotton, the first thing, I have pre-washed it, and I serge it before I run it through the washer and dryer because I don't want it to unravel. But after that, I need to tear it to make sure that I have everything on the straight. So, nope, not yet. Let me go down another inch. Okay, so now I have the end, so it's 100% straight on the straight between this corner and this corner. And that's going to make it a lot easier to match up and make sure that everything's on grain. So this is kind of wrinkly. I got stuff going on, so I'm actually going to iron this first and then I'll come back. And I'm cutting out, what is this, the skirt front. And my size apparently is slightly longer, ever so slightly longer, and I'm cutting out size 16. So what I'm going to do is just kind of move it in, you know. If I just move it in just a little bit like this, I'll have a bubble here, but I'll just cut it up down below, you know, even with where it should be. No one will notice that there's a little bit of, what is this, like maybe a 1/4 inch difference or something. But if you're cutting a size larger than this, and you're sticking off even up to an inch, I would still just bump it in like that. If you're going to be dealing with more than an inch of bringing in, you might want to think of a different layout. But for me, that is fine. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish cutting out my skirt pieces here. Okay, got a little hungry, so I went downstairs to get some supper, but I am back now. And it looks like I'm going to be working on this bodice part here first. So starting with the front, here is my, obviously, you know, Frankenstein's little front piece. The back we will deal with shortly. There are a lot of dots up on top that aren't necessary for my view. I am doing view A, and of all of these dots, this is the only one that I need for view A. So what I am going to do, the way I'm going to strategize my marking is before I serge around, and I will be serging around each piece, I'm going to clip my notches. So I have a lot of notches here. And then for the circle, in this one, you know, there is only the one circle. The way that I make my marks, again, if you've never seen, is I have a scrap of leather that I put underneath tissue paper. Hole punch, punches it out. Heat erasable pen to color in that circle. And this one looks like it's almost out of ink, but that's okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and mark, you know, like I said, these I don't need to deal with. I don't need, yeah, all the rest of, well, no, on the bodice side back, there's another circle that you need to deal with, but the rest of these top circles I don't need to worry about. So I'm going to go ahead and mark these dots, clip all the notches, and then take these pieces over to my serger and serge around the edges. And what that is I just barely go around the edge. I try not to cut off fabric, you know, just to encapsulate it so that nothing's going to fray on me, because all of these will be exposed seams and they will be pressed open. Okay, so I've got them all marked up, notched up, and serged around. And the first piece I'm going to deal with is our side front piece. And what I need to do is do some stay stitching. So it looks like they only want you to do stay stitching up here at the top. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to put it in at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, I want to introduce you to the machine I'm going to be using today. This little pink machine is a Singer 127 from 1927. I just got done Building Her, Restoring Her and Building Her on my other YouTube channel if you're interested in vintage sewing machines. It is Promethean sewing machines. But I like, after I build them, I like to give them a really good test run, and making a garment is a perfect way just to like do their maiden voyage shakedown cruise where I make sure all of the little fine tuning is done. So I'm going to be using her. She is a straight stitch shuttle machine, and I think she's beautiful. So let me go ahead and bring my bodice side front pieces over here to start sewing. I know her bobbin is almost out of thread, but I'm hoping I have enough in here to do one more little piece. It's a shuttle machine, and they're, you know, by design a little bit noisier than some bobbin machines, but I love the sound personally. Okay. And she makes a lovely little straight stitch. How fun is that? Okay, let me go ahead and go get my front piece because I believe there's a bit of straight stitching to do on that piece too. Okay, so on the bodice front pieces, there are two. There's 2 notches on these sides, and we need to do stay stitching between those notches. You know what, just to make it a little bit easier to see, I am gonna draw a little line where they are because for some reason they're just blending in for me here. Okay, so between the top notch and the bottom notch, I'm going to do also a row of straight stitching at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Don't want to move the camera back, but I just had to wind another bobbin, and it works great. But if you've never seen a shuttle before, it works like this. You stick the little spool inside, pull the thread down. So after you pull it over and back up, then when you pull the thread, the little spool inside turns, okay? So that's it. That is the bobbin. It looks like a rocket ship. Okay, so this was my center front, very center front here. And I'm going to take one of my side front pieces and match it up. We're going to do this one here. I've got a notch to match up here. And usually the top notch is at the very beginning of the curve of the princess seam, and underneath the notch, so I'll match up the bottom notch here, is the bottom of the curve of the princess seam, okay? So this part should be pretty straightforward here. Now it's in between the notches where all the curviness happens. So they had us stay stitch this to make it so that it's going to lay easier while we stitch. I'm going to put 3 little notches. I'm only cutting them about a 1/4 inch deep here, but that's going to allow this piece to flex so I can line up the edge of this center front piece more of a curve, so it'll match up with the curve of the side front piece, okay? So instead of pressing this open, the entire seam allowance is going to be pressed that way, all right? So 5/8 of an inch pressed towards center front on both front pieces. Okay, so I've only sewed the first 2 pieces together, but I got to tell you what my gut is telling me. There is no lining to this. This bodice, it's meant to be fairly tight, and it's just a single layer of lightweight fabric. Now, thankfully, the version that I am doing has the sleeves and everything up there. I think I'll be okay. But if I was doing one of these versions, everything within my being says, make sure you line this and bone this bodice. Bone it because you're going to need the support there. If only on the sides, fine, but I would even go sides and on the front. And what I mean by that, well, let me go get a piece of boning and show you. So with the version I'm making, yeah, I can wear a bra with it, a normal bra. And for the strap one, yes, if your straps of your bra match up, yeah, you can. But here's the thing, the boning, and this is just some wriggling boning, which is easy peasy to use. you can run it along the seam line in the seam allowance and just stitch it in. It goes in pretty easily, but what that's going to do is keep the structure of that bodice, okay? I mean, making a single layer, yeah, it'll work, but it's going to be so lightweight. Okay, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to line my bodice and I'm going to put boning in it just so you can see in case you're making one of these versions and you really need it. Because I just really feel like that it's the right thing to do. So I'm going to go ahead and with just my bodice pieces here, I'm going to cut out 4 more pieces of fabric to use as a lining, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I have a big old white sheet that I just cut up. I'm going to be using it for my lining, and I have enough, and this fabric is light enough. I'm going to line the skirt too, but we'll deal with that when we get to it. Yeah. Okay, so obviously I'm going to change up some things on how I build this bodice, but I really think that it'll make it a much more refined bodice. But at this point, what I'm going to do is just continue sewing my pieces together until I have one big long bodice strip. So I'm going to step this aside for a minute, get my back pieces out. My center back is cut on a fold, so this is my center back. And then I have side back pieces that are going to need to get sewn on, and with these, sew it at 5/8 of an inch also. Okay, so now that that is done, I am matching up my side seams here, and I'm going to be sewing these at 5/8. Okay, so I just have it pinned up here on my dress form because I want to see at this point, before I do boning, before I do lining and everything, how it's going to fit. And this dress form is generally my shape, you know, give or take. And so across the back, it's smooth. I have a little bit of ease. It's not under stress at all, but I don't have a whole lot of extra fabric, which is what I want. Now, it's not supposed to come all the way together in the front because there is a placket that's going to go down here, but I think I have it placed close enough to get an idea of how that placket will line up. So I think it's pretty good. I am happy with it. So while it's on here, I'm getting a better idea of where I want the boning. And like I said before, I'm going to be following this seam here. And if you're just, you know, doing the strapped or something like that, that's going to help this have support. I am also, no, I'm not going to put it in the back, but, ooh, do I want to put it in the front? I am changing my mind right now. I'm going to put it in the front, and I'm going to put it in the back, but I am not going to put it on the side seams, okay? Here's my thinking right now. This is going to give enough support to have a nice shape in the front. This here, it feels like it's going to want to kind of droop. And if you have just the halter one, where it just ties around your neck and it doesn't have straps and it doesn't have like my view A that's going to have a whole blouse thing here, it definitely will droop, and you'll want the boning in the back. So that's why I'm going to put it here, because for that option, it would be really good. Under the arm, if you have it here and here, I don't think under the arm is that important. Plus, sometimes under the arm it can poke you, and we just don't want to deal with that. So I'm going to put a little boning here and boning here. And it looks like my camera battery's about dead, so I'm going to go switch it out. All right, so the first thing I'm doing for this front one is I'm putting a little mark 5/8 of an inch down from the top. And I'm going to put another mark down here, 5/8 inch from the bottom, okay? Because I definitely don't want my boning to go past those marks. And I need tape. Hang on a second, let me peek around. I might need to run downstairs real quick. Okay, so different people put this on different ways. I'm just showing you the way I do it. And I use first aid tape. This one is waterproof. I like it because it's thicker. It's got a nice thickness to it. extremely sticky, and since it's waterproof, it'll probably hold up in the wash. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and put a little bit over this end down here. And the wriggling is about 1/2 inch wide. So I'm just going to cut off a piece about that wide and place it over the edge. Okay. And I'm also going to cut the very corners slightly lower, so it's slightly rounded, okay? Now, I'm going to place this just above that 5/8 inch mark. And this is a curved piece. Trying to figure out how to do this with the camera. I think I can do it like this. And I can see when I curve it about where it needs to be cut. And so I'm just going to hold it in place and cut it just below that other mark. And get another piece of tape and cut it again at about 1/2 inch wide. And again, round off the corners. Okay, so it looks like that up at the top. And put my little tape over the end, okay? I can trim this little edge off here. That is just how I do it. Wriggling is kind of cool because you can sew through it. You can sew on the very edge of it. You can do all kinds of things. You can also stick it inside of a seam allowance and sew through it that way. Yeah, I do kind of like the look of it. So what I'm going to do is put a pin up here at the top at that mark so I can make sure I'm not going to go above it. And I'm opening this up. And again, you can put it all kinds of ways. This is just the way I'm doing it right now. I'm putting a pin at that mark below so I don't go below that mark, okay? And I'm going to go back to my sewing machine and I am just going to run a row of stitching about 1/4 inch from this seam in. And that's going to have me stitching straight down the center of my little wriggling strip. Okay, so on the outside, it's going to look like I have another row of stitching 1/4 inch in, which should be fine. Okay, so now you can see this side has no boning, this side does, and from the front, I don't know if it makes a big difference, but from the side you can see it definitely has more support. And it doesn't look bad. My red thread is slightly darker than the thread of my fabric, but I don't think that that's that big of a deal. And the 100-year-old 127 sewing machine is such a trooper. She goes right through it. Sometimes you have to turn her wheel to get her started, but she goes through the really, really thick boning, so that's really cool. Good to see her working so good, working so good. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put the other front piece in the same way, and the side piece. Okay, so previously I pressed it towards the back, and I can just leave it that way. That's fine. No, I'm going to repress this because it is going to be lined, and I want this and the lining piece to be open. But when I come back to the back, I am going to repress this so that they go towards the center back and place my boning in here just the same, marking the top at 5/8, the bottom at 5/8, and putting a piece of boning taped off at the ends right in here in the middle. And doing the same thing where I stitch it on, there I am, at about 1/4 inch all the way through. And that just holds it really, really securely. It's not going to go anywhere, especially once I have the lining piece in here. It's going to be very well protected. My microphone is off, so I'm just going to tell you what I see. I have sewn all the bodice pieces together of my lining, so it's one long strip from the center front all the way around. And now I have my sleeve pieces. There's a back one and a front one, and I am looking at the back yoke piece, and I am showing you the front yoke piece. So let's see what I'm going to do, because your guess is as good as mine right here. I am going to clip my notches, and after I get done with that, I'm probably going to look for any circles, because that's how I usually roll. Let's see what I do here. Pulling more pens, because I tend to overpen. Look at all the pens I put on here. And I'm going to stay stitch. I am pointing at the neckline, so I bet I'm going to tell you that I'm going to stay stitch this at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'll probably be doing it on the back pieces too. And then I'm going to serge all the way around each piece. Look at that. I have serged around these pieces. I think they look lovely. And now I need to sew 2 rows of gathering stitches along the bottom between the notches on the front piece. On the back piece, I'm also going to have to make 2 rows of gathering stitches. One at about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, one at about 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I can adjust them. Here's the back piece. I'm also showing you on the back piece, I will be stay stitching the neckline, serging around it, and doing the gathering stitches from the dot to the dot. Is that the correct thing? I'm looking at the instructions for guidance at this point. Yeah, I believe that is what it is. I'm going to start at the dot or the notch. Can't tell. I'm probably going to start at that dot and put 2 rows of gathering stitches all the way across, serge all the way around, and I will be right back. All right, so that is now done. And so I have my 2 fronts on top of my 2 backs. I have punched out that little circle, which is basically 5/8 of an inch in. That circle is from the edge and from the bottom. So what I'm going to have to be doing, though, is hemming up the side of my sleeve. Let's see when I get around to doing that. All right, so now I am going to place my front shoulder seam even with my back shoulder seam. I'm going to be stitching this at 5/8 of an inch and then press the seam allowance open. I'll be doing that for both shoulders. I don't know. Hello, are you working? Are you working? Are you working? Something's going crazy with my microphone, and everything was turned on, but then it wasn't recording sound, unfortunately. So you have just experienced my lame attempt at voiceover, so sorry about that. I have to, on my monitor while I'm recording, there's like a little line where I can usually see little green dots shooting across my screen if I have volume. And usually I try to pay close attention to that. But apparently I did not, and I'm sorry about that. So anyhow, let me give you a recap of where I am here. I have transferred over all the dots that were on the pattern pieces for the bodice, okay? So on the side front, there is one over here, right, let me raise you up a bit there, right here. On the side back, there's one here. On the bodice back, there's one here. And on the bodice front, one here, okay? So you got 2 dots on each side of your front and 2 dots on each side of your back. And so I'm just going to set these aside for a minute. And what I have here is on my back of my piece, I have a dot here and a dot here. And then on my front, I have a dot here, and on the other side, one in the same place, okay? So what I need to do is get all my stuff organized here. Before I actually sew this piece onto my bodice, I need to finish off this edge which is going to be the little sleeve cap area here. So I'm just going to make a narrow hem. I'm going to turn it up about 5/8 of an inch in, and then tuck that bottom under and stick a little pin in it. I think my pin is sticky. Once I have this pinned all the way across, I'm going to machine edge stitch it just along the very top edge right here. And it's just going to be that easy to get it nicely hemmed and out of the way. Okay, so now I have my little edges hemmed up here. I need to get this part all gathered together onto my bodice. And I think the easiest way to picture how we're going to do this is I have my yoke kind of upside down on my table here so that the bottoms are up. Now I'm going to take my bodice piece and fold it. Okay, so this is up here. Fold it at the side seams like this, all right? So this is how it's going to match up. If I place my bodice, this is the up, this is the waistline, and I place this on top of it, okay? So I've got these open out to the sides. The very edge of my hemmed deal, because I hemmed it at a 5/8 inch seam allowance, that's going to go right alongside of where that dot is. So I'm doing the back one first, okay? So I'm just going to pin this here. I need to pin my center back, and I did not mark my center back, so let me fold this real quick. Okay, this is my center back here. I'm going to pin that. And then over on this side, this is my front getting it out of the way. The very edge of this back piece matches up with where this dot is. This is the side seam, so just barely on the back side of the side seam, okay? It's about an inch in. So I can put this here. And now I can see where, when I pull my gathering threads, how that's going to match up. Now, this is the front. So if I fold this over, okay, the very center front of my yoke lines up with the raw edge of my bodice, okay? So those match up like that. And over here, let me pull this out of the way, the folded edge of this hemmed edge of the front also matches up where this dot here is. Okay, so that's my side seam. It's just barely to the front of it. Again, about an inch into the front side piece. Okay, so now I have these pinned. So now I can see, all right, when I pull these gathering threads, I'm going to match it up here. When I pull those, I'll match it up there. And again, over here on this right side, it's going to be the same thing, where I fold this in half at the side seam, like this, matching up the raw edges of the center front area, like that, and matching up my hemmed edge here with the dot that is just about an inch ahead of my side seam. Okay, so now that everything is in place, I had to do it that way because it gets a little bit confusing in here if you just try to start pinning, okay? So I'm going to go ahead, pull my gathering threads, and try to get all of this just evenly spaced in here. And again, if you kept track, it's always, well, always is a big word, but it's usually a lot easier to pull the bobbin thread than it is to pull the needle thread. Okay, so once I have it gathered on here, because I'm going to be doing a couple things with the lining and excessive gathering threads drive me nuts, what I'm going to do is after I've gathered them, and I know they fit, take all of my gathering threads together, make a big old loopy knot, stick a pin through it, and take the pin to the very top of the fabric where the gathering threads end. And then I can just pull it, and that'll make a nice little knot right at the top there. Okay, and then I'm going to cut my threads about 1 inch away from that knot so I have less to deal with. What I'm going to be doing is actually coming back and at about 1/4 inch in. I could do this by hand. I could baste this by hand, but I feel like doing it on my sewing machine because, you know, I'm having fun with that little pinky sewing machine. And I'm going to just do a row of stitches at 1/4 inch just to hold this in place so I can remove all of these pins, because as soon as I get that done, I'm going to go ahead and get the lining attached here so that I can get all of it assembled together. So that's my strategy. Gather it, pin it, tie off my threads, and then sew this at 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I sewed it on. My seam line kind of comes and goes between 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch, but my main thing is I didn't want to get it up to the 5/8 inch level because I need to get my lining sewed on here now. So what I'm going to do is lay this with the yoke side, the gathered side up, okay? And if you open it, you can get a better look at what all of this is going to be, you know? But at this point, I need it down, and I'm going to get my lining pieces. And let's see here, I am going to be matching up my lining, making sure I'm putting the upside of my lining to the upside of my main fabric. And let's see, I'm going to start with the side seam because that is the one that sticks out the most right now. Just going to pin the seam allowances together. So basically I have the right side of my lining facing the right side of my bodice, but I've got that yoke in the middle, okay? So with my side seam, underarm area pinned, I can go ahead and pin up here and everything in between, and making sure that I match up my seams as I go. So I've got this seam here, I'm matching up on both sides. And once I have this pinned, you know, matching everything up all the way across, I'm going to come back and sew it at a 5/8 inch seam allowance straight across here, all the way across the top. So now that that is sewn, I can raise my camera up here, pull the lining down. I'm just going to smooth it down here. And since this fabric is so thin, I'm not really concerned a whole lot about understitching and everything because it's all going to be on the inside, you know. But if I fold this over here, this is what it looks like for the front, over here for the front, and let me flip it over. This is the back, okay? So we have our bodice, some gathers, and a shoulder. This is the neckline up there. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and iron it. I'm going to go to my ironing board and press this so that I have a nice seam here. It's kind of bulky, especially up around the seam allowances where I have a whole lot of stuff going on. So I am going to trim down a little bit, just trimming out those seam allowances. I'm not going to worry about grading the entire thing because my fabric is fairly lightweight all the way across, but where I have thick multi-layered seams, I'm just going to pull some of that out just so that it'll lay a little bit flatter up on top. Now, where I have my, move it down, where I have my boning, this is my front seam. The boning ends below where my seam is, okay? When you're sewing this, if you did put boning in, be sure that that's the case. But if not, you'll need to do some adjusting. All right, so I'm basically just cutting out some of that, so that's nice and thin. Now on the inside where I chopped out that extra in the seam allowance, it makes it lay flatter. At this point, these two layers are going to become one, all right? Let me trim this thread off here. So once I iron it down, I'm going to go ahead and pin, and I could even baste a raw edge to raw edge here and around the very bottom, just to hold all of this together, because this is going to just act as a single unit according to the pattern at this point. So let me go ahead and do those steps, which is iron this. Well, first, trim out any bulky seam allowances. Iron this so that the lining is nice and flat. And then I'm going to run a row of basting stitches at about 1/4 inch down the side and across the bottom, just matching up the raw edges to hold all of this together. Okay, so at this point, we have our little blouse type. This is what it looks like on the inside. I just have the row of stitching at approximately 1/4 inch, give or take, holding the lining together with the raw edge of the fashion fabric, okay? I'm gonna set this aside for a minute and get my skirt pieces out. And I am gonna be lining the skirt, so I need to cut out of my white sheet, which is soon to be skirt lining, my skirt front and skirt back pieces. So let me do that off camera, of course, because you don't need to see that, and I will be back in a moment. Morning, it is the next morning here. It got late last night, and so I thought it'd be good to start fresh tomorrow, which is today, so you know, time warp. I am going to get started on the skirt. Now I have of the fronts, I got 2 cut of my fashion fabric and 2 cut of my lining fabric, and then the same with the back, except it's on a fold. One of the fashion fabric on a fold and one of the lining fabric on a fold. So basically, I'm going to be doing a lot of similar things with them, except for the pockets. Of course, I'm only putting pockets on the fashion fabric. There's pleats on here, and I'm going to go ahead and punch out and mark where those pleats are before I take my tissue paper off. What I'm going to do is punch out a circle at the bottom of the line. Can't see that. At the bottom of the line for my size, and up here like about 1/4 inch in from the top for my size. All of the way across, and that's going to make it easy for me to then reach through with my heat erasable pen and draw in those 2 dots. Okay, and I am marking this, well, I should be, after I punch out all of my circles, I will mark it on the right side of my fabric, not the wrong side like I have folded here, okay? So, get all these punched out. These 2 circles on the side are for pockets. These I will only mark on my fashion fabric, not on my lining, but everything else I am marking on both the lining and my cute little fashion fabric. Okay, so I am going to demonstrate on my lining fabric because I marked it first, and I will be serging all the way around it, but I want to get my pleats put in first so I can serge over the folded pleat. So at this point, I just have my little dots there, and just because it's me and it makes me happier, I am going to go ahead and draw lines to connect them. Like this, all the way across. And when I iron it, my lines will disappear, but it just makes me feel like I can line things up easier if I have lines, if that makes any sense at all. Okay, so now I mark it on the right side of the fabric because the pleat instructions that have arrows are based on the right side of the fabric. If I was to mark this on the wrong side of the fabric, my directional arrows would be backwards. So you can either draw your arrows in here, you know, like that, to give yourself a little cheat, because they will disappear, or just keep your little paper handy. So what I'm going to do is fold this one and bring it over to match up with my center one. Put in some pins on both sides, because this is quite a wide pleat. And on this side, bring it over. And I'm doing the lining pleats. You know, some people would say, well, make your lining just gathered or make it narrower or whatever. I just feel like doing it this way this time. My fabric itself is fairly lightweight all the way around, so I really don't think it's going to add a lot of extra bulk to my project. So once I have this pinned all the way across, what I'm going to do is come back, and across the top here, I'm going to run a row of stay stitching at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance just to hold them in place. Once that is done, then I'll go to my serger and serge all the way around it, okay? But by doing that, I only have one row of serging coming across here. And I am, even though it's lining, I'm serging it because the bottom of this is going to be loose. So there is still a chance in the wash it could rub up against something and fray. I don't want that. So what I have done here, I'm going to do for the other 3 skirt pieces of the front, basically, actually for the back too, because the back is just twice as wide because it's cut on a fold. So it's mark the pleats, fold the pleats, stay stitch the pleats, and then serge around each piece. Except, I'm going to throw another caveat here. Before I serge the lining, I want my lining to be slightly shorter than the rest of my fabric. I'm going to say 1 inch. That way the hem of my lining will definitely be shorter than the rest of the fabric. So I'm just going to really quickly put a little line here where 1 inch is and cut across. Okay, so before I serge, I'm going to make sure that I trim off this bottom inch of all of my lining fabrics. Lots of steps, I know, but they're not difficult, you know. So anyhow, that's my process. Next time we come back, I will have all of my skirt pieces pleated, stay stitched, trimmed at the bottom for lining, and serged all the way around. Okay, so I just got my front pieces done over there, grabbed my back piece, and I misspoke. Back piece is not cut on a fold, it is 2 separate pieces. And the difference with the back one is there is a pleat line here that's going to be folded over and matched up to the center seam after it is sewn. Okay, so what I would suggest is to serge. I'm going to go ahead and make these pleats over here, okay, and get those pinned together separately. And I will serge down across the bottom and back up this side. Just ignore this. I had some tape on here and I ironed it and it shrunk up and it made a mess. So just ignore this mess here. But serge that way and then sew the 2 together. So I'll walk you through my process, but just letting you know, yeah, this is not cut on a fold. It's a little bit different. So my first step is to go ahead and make these 2 pleats on this fabric. And so for the back piece, once again, the first thing I am doing is trimming off that bottom inch of my lining piece so I don't forget. I got both layers here. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and mark my pleats up on the top up here. Okay, so I've got my little dots transferred over. I'm just going to deal with one little piece at a time. Go ahead and draw my lines in here. So 1, 2, 3, and the center one. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and pin this one together. Again, putting a couple pins up here at the top on each pleat to hold it nice and flat. I'm not going to touch this center one yet. I'm just going to leave it where it is, okay? All right, so with it like this, I'm going to need to stay stitch across here once all of these are in. But what I need to do actually first is I'm going to serge down, around, and back up this side. And what I'm doing with this piece, I'll do with all my other back pieces, okay? So leaving this pleat not made and this top not serged. Okay, so now I'm going to pin my center back seam. And could you do this before you put your pleats pinned up and everything? Of course you could. I'm just choosing not to right now for some random reason. So, but yes, definitely you could sew this seam first and then put your pleats in. No problem with that. So what I need to do is match up my center back seam. For some reason, my fingers keep dropping it. Down the back, there's some notches in the middle. Sew this at 5/8. Press the seam allowance open, but press it carefully so you don't erase your heat erasable pen mark right here. Okay, so now I have my center seam in. Press my seam allowances open. There you go. And so now I'm going to take this pleat line and match it up to that center seam here. Get my fingers to work. And again, pin it twice on my wide pleat. Do the same thing on this side. Bring it over to the middle. Make sure that the edges match up here so that everything is angled right. Okay, and now I have my entire pleat system pinned at the back of my skirt. So I'm going to come across at a 1/2 inch and stay stitch across all of these pleats to hold them in place. I actually will probably iron it first, just this top area, put my iron on it to hold them. Stay stitch across at a 1/2 inch and then serge all the way across, serging once just to lock in the edges of all of these pleats. Okay, so this is what my back looks like right now of my lining. A couple big box pleats, stay stitched and serged. Oh dear, look at that. I need to flip that piece up. It's not going to make that much of a difference, but it'll make me happy. So what I need to do is do the same thing with my fashion fabric. And then once I get that done, then we'll start working on putting the pockets in. Hang on. So I'm just going to flip this little piece over and stitch it back just because I don't want that to be down like that because it would bother me. So I'm just going to put a little stitch right here. Okay, next time you see me, I will have my little daisy fabric made up just like this in the back. Okay, so now that that is done, I need to start on my pocket pieces. So I'm just clipping my notch and I need to serge around these pieces. There are 4 of them cut out. So let me go serge around them very carefully and I'll be right back. Okay, so I have serged my pieces and ironed them. So I am just coming back right now and marking these 2 little placement dots. And even though I clipped my notch, I'm sticking a little line right there. So it's easier for me to see. And now I need to get my skirt fashion fabric pieces to put the pockets onto. So this is a back piece, and whatever I do here, I'm also going to be doing to the sides of the front pieces. So I need to find a pocket that I'll be able to place right sides together. One does, one doesn't, because there's 2 sides here. And I need to match up where my notch is on my skirt, which is eluding me somehow. Let me go figure out where that notch is. Looks like it should be right here. Okay, now I see it. Sometimes it just takes a few. So now I can match up that notch with the notch on my pocket and place this here. And I need to sew down this way, but only at 3/8 of an inch. The dots are at 5/8. Don't go dot to dot. Go in about 1/4 inch. So 3/8 of an inch here. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the back and both sides of my front pieces. So now that I've sewn on, I have pressed the seam allowances towards the pocket. Okay, so up here it's towards the pocket. This is the back side. This is the front side. And now I'm going to match everything up here. So let me go ahead and match up the skirt part, and then I'll get to the pocket. Okay, so I've ironed my piece, so of course my marks disappeared. So I'm just using my pocket piece because it's smaller. I can lay it here with the edge of my pocket piece along the edge of my fabric and just reach through and remark those little circles. So what I'm going to be doing is from the top here, sewing at 5/8 of an inch down to this circle, okay, like that. At that circle, pivoting and coming in here and going all the way around the pocket. Can't see that. All the way around the pocket this way, coming back up, making sure my seam allowances are still facing towards the pocket. I'm going to cross them and hit my dot out here, which is 5/8 of an inch from the edge. And at that point, pivot and head down and sew it at 5/8 the rest of the way down the side of the skirt here, okay? So it's, once again, raise you up, coming down here, pivot, go all the way around, make sure the seam allowances are pressed out to this point, and then straight down. And I'll do this on the other side of the skirt also. Okay, that is done, and I got to refill my bobbin again a few minutes ago, and I love doing the first trial run on a machine that I rebuild because you never know how you need to adjust, you know, because I've completely torn it apart and put it back together. So as you go, something might need a little extra oil, something might need to be tightened a little, something might need to be loosened up a little that you just don't know until you've run it for a significant amount of time. And so usually by about this point, I can see what the condition is, and she's running a lot quieter. She's a lot smoother. I think that she's going to be a great machine. But I can tell you this, on a shuttle machine, when you're winding the bobbin, don't wind it too much, because if you wind it too fat, it tends to bog up inside the shuttle. It makes it a little bit harder to pull out easily. So that's my 2 cents on that. Anyhow, my pocket is sewn on. This is the front on top. This is the back here. So what I need to do is, before I press it, I'm going to want my pocket to go towards the front, okay, so that it's easy to put my hand in, because the other way is very awkward. And so I'm going to want to press this seam allowance open. So when I get up to the bottom of my pocket, I'm just going to clip the back seam allowance. I'm not going to clip it up to my threads, maybe 1/8 of an inch away, so that I can, to my seam. I'm about 1/8 of an inch away from my seam, so I can press this part open. Up here, they're suggesting that you clip it and do the same, but since it's such a small amount, I'm just going to leave this whole upper part towards the front, okay? Now the lining, of course, doesn't have a pocket, so the side seam on the lining, just press it open the entire way. Once I have it this way, I'm going to, for right now, just stick a little straight pin up here in this seam allowance to make sure that when this gets sewed, it'll be going the right direction, okay? So let me clip the other side like this, press the side seam open below the pocket on this fabric, and on my white fabric where I will be sewing my side seams together off camera, just press those seam allowances open the entire way. Okay, so I've got my skirt sewed together here, and there's something I need to do before I get everything set. If you remember, when I was altering my front side piece, I added 1/2 inch on each side. And what I need to do is see if I'm able to just ease in the difference, or if I'm going to have to adjust one of these pleats. So I'm basically just going to lay this. This is the front edge. This here is my side seam. Get one of my skirt pieces, like this one here. So if I match up that front edge, and this is the lining, and this is just for placement, it's not for permanent, and I line up this side seam, okay, because my bodice piece is going to be slightly bigger. Okay, so you can see it's large, and I wanted to know if I thought I could ease it in. And if I was to ease it, what I would do is fold it in half this way, pin it here, fold it in half this way, pin it there. I might be able to make that work, but just to be sure, I need to choose how I'm going to alter this. And these are very deep pleats, and so it won't take much. And I think that what I'm going to try is just this outside pleat right here. So I'm just going to clip it open and clip up at the top. Unfortunately, yes, I have to do that. I was thinking I would be able to ease it, but I don't want puckering, you know. So now that this pleat is open, let me clip one more up here. There, okay. I can just match everything up all the way over to the pleat that I have open. Hang on, let me pin a couple things in place. And the main thing is that from the front, where they come together in that box pleat, I want it to do that here too. So if I'm extending it here like this, and I'll fold it to the other side so you can see what I'm talking about. When I open it up here, and yes, this is the lining, but you know, it'll be the same. Okay, this is the pleat here that I changed. And it's just pinned together, but you get the idea of this crease here is where it used to be. It's a 1/2 inch bigger now. So at this point I can see I need to do that. So before I sew anything together, I am going to take all of my skirt pieces and make that change where I am, so that this fold here is 1/2 inch exposed, repin it in place, and I know that it'll fit. So I'm going to do it to just the fronts, obviously, because I didn't alter the back pieces at all. The front on both sides of the lining and the front on both sides of my fashion fabric. It's going to look exactly the same from the outside. You know, it's still going to be a fairly deep pocket. If this really bothered you and you wanted to, you know, split it, the difference even more, you could open this side too and make each side a 1/4 inch bigger instead of one side a 1/2 inch bigger, you know. They're box pleats, they're very forgiving. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I will, once I have them pinned, I'll just do another little stay stitch line right here at the top and press it to get that crease out, and then I'll be ready to go ahead and start sewing it onto my bodice. And there's still a collar that we need to put on here. Can't find my pattern piece, but there's a collar up on top, but we can't put the collar on until we get the front placket on, and we can't sew the front placket on until we get the bodice sewn onto the skirt. So, you know, there's a sequence we have to go through. So let me get all of my skirts adjusted this way, and I will be right back. Okay, so while I was stitching where I adjusted that dart, I went ahead and took my stay stitching over my side seam allowance so that it would stay facing the front like I want, so my pocket will go the right way. And now I'm going to get started attaching these. So it's going to be a lasagna kind of layer here, where it's going to be my skirt and then my bodice. And then my lining skirt. And I need to make sure I'm placing my lining skirt. I want the right side of my lining skirt to be up against my bodice lining here. So I'll have my wrong side with my seam allowances showing facing up here. Okay, so I'm gonna like layer it like that. So the first step is to match up my main fabric. So not sure what that little black thing was. I'll match up the sides, the front edges, and the center back, and then see how everything balances out in between those landmarks. So that's my side seam, and you can see now that I made that adjustment, the bodice fits on there really well, so that's a good thing. So this is the other side seam here, and that's going to match up well in the front too. So let me get all of this pinned first. Okay, so just to make sure that nothing gets messed up, I'm going to go to my machine, and at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm just going to, which is basically over where this line is here, I'm just going to sew this whole thing on like this. At a 1/4 inch, that seam won't show when I make my final seam. So I'm going to put that on so I can pull all these pins out, and I'll be right back. Okay, so now that that stitching is done, and I just quickly checked to make sure nothing was folded the wrong way, everything's as it should be, I'm going to go ahead and I'm pinning my lining on top of it, like I said, so that I'm looking at my bad side, my seam allowances and everything are showing. And I'm just going to match it up exactly the same as the front. And then once these are all pinned together, I'm going to come back and sew this whole row at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so on the instructions, which I haven't looked at in quite a while, they just want you to press the seam allowance up, which I am obviously not doing because of all of the stuff that I have changed on this skirt. So if I open up my dress now, what I see on the inside is my lovely lining. It's kind of bulky up here though, so I am going to come back inside and do just a little bit of grading. The fashion fabric and the bodice fabric are sewed together at that 1/4 inch seam. And I'm going to get my pinking shears and trim those. Okay, because that's the thickest part, and I have added a lot of weight because I have lining, I have boning. The pattern as it was has none of that, so I'm a little more hefty here. But if I can trim off just about half of the width of this seam allowance by pinking it, that's going to make it a lot easier to turn and to press, and it'll lay better. So this side that is the skirt lining at this point, I'm gonna trim off the serging, but I'm not going to be cutting it terribly low. Okay, so that's how I am trimming all of this. Once I get it all trimmed, I'm going to press the seam allowance down so I have a nice edge right here. Okay, and once I see how that's going to lay, I'm going to come back and decide if I'm going to put a row of edge stitching on here or not. I probably will, because that's a whole lot for just one little thread to be holding on there. But let me go ahead and get everything graded and pressed down first. Okay, so I have it pressed down, and the grading made a huge difference. It's laying really, really nice. But just to be sure that, you know, it'll hold well, I'm going to come back and run a row of edge stitching. Here's my pen. Because all of my stuff is below this seam, I'm going to be putting my edge stitching right about here all the way around my skirt, okay? And double checking as I sew to make sure that both of these layers are behaving as they should. Okay, so let me go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, so I have a lot of layers going on here in some of these spots, and that little 127 is just blasting through it like a trooper. So happy for her. Okay, but on the inside, I've got my red thread showing. On the outside, you don't see it so much, but I think that that is going to be holding these pleats down in place. Oops, I had to start a thread here. It's going to be holding it in place and everything really nice and smooth and extra secure. So the next step that I need to do is work on the hem. Look at all of this thread. Must have caught my trash can. For the skirt itself, it's relatively flat on the bottom. I think I'm going to be doing about 1¼ inch hem where I turn it up 1¼ inch, turn that outside edge down, and I am going to be machine stitching it across, okay? The hem of the lining, so this is the part I see here on the inside of it, so I don't see it so much from the outside. I'm going to do the same thing, turning it up 1¼ inch and then turning that upper edge over and machine stitching across the top. So I'm hemming both the skirt and the lining by the same amount. So my finished length, my lining will be 1 inch shorter than my skirt, okay? So I'm just going to go over to my ironing board and basically press up the main part first all the way across, and then turn it under, press it again, and then stitch it. Okay, do we have volume? Yes, we do. Okay, so I wanted to show you how she looks right now before I put the front placket and the collar on. And it looks kind of retro to me. She's kind of cute. It's not meeting in the front because that's where the placket's going to go, so I just wanted to kind of pin her the way that she is. I really am glad that I added the lining, especially in the bodice. I think it just would have been a little too unstructured for this type of a look, at least for me, without it. The boning back here is going to hold this nice and up so that, you know, it's not going to be crushed in on itself. Not that it would, but this is the main one, the boning that goes up and over here, okay? And it's curving nicely. So this is going to be my strategy. After, and I haven't hemmed it yet, I still need to go do that. After it's hemmed, I'm going to sew these two raw edges together of the skirt down the front. And from that point, you know, the bottom is hemmed, this is together, I'm just going to consider the lining and the outside skirt as one unit and go ahead and put the placket on that way. I can tell you that I kind of like the look of it without the standing collar. I'll put the collar on because I have it cut out and it's in the pattern, but having it just, you know, with no collar and figure where the stay stitching is, that's where the outside seam would be. I kind of like it just with that little tab open there. So anyway, that's what she's looking like right now. Very cute. Nice pockets, you know, we do love a good pocket. So there you go. And welcome to the next day. Before I go to put the placket on, I kind of wanted to show you how it's looking here. So from the inside, I used red thread, but you know, that's okay. You can see the hem is made so that on the inside, if I open it up this way, I can see where I sewed the hem here and here. But when it's just open, it's all nice. And I think that having the lining in there is actually giving a little more body to this skirt. It's almost acting like a slight petticoat, but it's kind of cute. It gives a little extra oomph, you know, that just a very lightweight limp fabric would not have. So I like that. So now I need to make my front placket. Now, last night off camera, I went ahead and I cut out 2 pieces of interfacing for my placket and for my collar. Same interfacing, my typical extremely lightweight interfacing, because I don't want to add a lot of of crispness to this. I just want it to be stable. So that's what I use my lightweight interfacing for. I'll show you the end of the bolt right now so you can know which one it is if you haven't seen it before. And I'm going to go to my ironing board and go ahead and fuse those pieces on to my placket so I can get ready to sew it onto the dress. And in case you haven't seen it before, this is the interfacing that I am talking about, P44F. That is the very, very lightweight fusible stuff. Okay, at the top of my placket piece, there are these circles, large circles that I'm cutting out. There's also a center fold line and buttonhole placement. I'm not worrying about that right now. On the placket, one edge is a little more curved, the other edge is flat. It is the curved edge that I am going to be marking these dots, and I'm marking them on the wrong side. Here's my pen. Right here, okay? And I'm just going to be putting a little line up here at the top where that center fold is, okay? So it looks like this. I'm going to do that for both of them. You put one placket on each side. Okay, so I've got this mark at the end, and there's a notch right here. I just put a little line where that notch is. I've got a notch right here on my dress. I put a line over that so you can see it a little bit better. So matching up this notch with that notch, I can see that the top of this piece is going to line up really well with the top of my dress. So I'm going to pin it along, matching raw edge to raw edge all the way down. Once I get it pinned in place, I'm going to sew it at 5/8 of an inch all the way down from top to bottom. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. Okay, now when you get to the end, if you're doing it my way, your placket's going to be longer than your dress, and that's just because I've already hemmed the dress, you know. That's okay. Leaving it unfolded and everything down here, I'm just going to sew straight down. Okay, so with these sewed together, I'm actually going to come back now, and the side that has all my lining and everything on it, I'm going to pink just that seam allowance about halfway, or at least cutting off the very edge, just to take some of the bulk off of this side. Okay, trying to do it up for the camera here, so like that. Then once I have them both pinked like that, I'm just going to leave the side that has the interfacing fused onto it just complete. That's okay. What I'm going to need to do is press under this edge here 5/8 of an inch, and just to make sure I get it absolutely on track, what I'm going to do is just with my ruler go ahead and make a line where I need to fold that, so when I go to my ironing board I can make sure that I press it exactly where it needs to be. So that's my step. First, grade out with my pinking shears this layer, and then draw a line at 5/8 of an inch and press this side under on both sides of my placket. Okay, so at this point I have this side pressed under. I have my little mark here, which is my fold line. So I'm just folding it right there. And let me stick a pin. If I can find my pins. Okay. Just stick a little pin right here. Now there's a dot. You can see it clearer on this side, but it's right here. What I need to do is sew in here and then straight up here. So I'm basically going to make stitches in the shape of an L, coming here to the dot and then turning and going straight up. All right, I'm going to do that for both sides. For the bottom, because you know, we hemmed ours and they have not, what I'm going to do is at the same time fold it over like this. Make sure I got everything nice and straight here. Stick a pin in, and just at the bottom of where this skirt hem is coming across, I'm going to go ahead and do a line of stitching straight across like that. So it's basically just below it, but continuing over. I want it slightly lower so I have room to flip it right side out. So there you go. So I'm going to sew here at the bottom and like this at the top. Okay, so after it is sewn, first thing I'm going to do is clip some of this out to get some bulk out. Just a little snip like that. And then I'm going to come in here and clip to the very corner. And I'm going to take a little bit out of this corner too, just for fun. So now I should be able to flip it around right side out like that. Okay, so now on the back, what I want is all the seam allowances. This is the one that we trimmed. That is part of the dress itself. I want all of the seam allowance to be underneath this placket. And I'm just going to put one little pin up here just to hold that in place for right now. Let me go ahead and do the bottom here, which of course is just a long straight piece. So I'm going to trim that down to about 1/4 inch or so. Take a diagonal at the corner and fold this right side out. Okay, so again, putting all the seam allowance inside the placket. I'm going to stick a pin over here. Okay, so what the instructions want you to do at this point is to very carefully and precisely put your folded edge over the stitching line and pin it in place. So it looks like this on the wrong side, and pin it in place on this side so that then you can come back and machine stitch it. Instead of pins, I am going to use Stitch Witchery fusible bond tape. So let me take you over to the ironing board and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so I've got my Stitch Witchery fusible bond, whatever you want to call it, fusible tape here. And what I'm going to do is just break it apart into smaller pieces because it's easier for me to use. Put it just inside that seam allowance. Place the edge so it covers up that stitching line and iron it in place. This way there are no pins to worry about, and it's going to stay fused right where I want it. So when I come back on this side to top stitch it, I know for 100% that I'm going to be able to catch my edge here. So then I've got that little bit. I'm just going to rip off, I don't know, maybe about 5 inches or so, and just go to the next little spot, put it on, get everything nice and straight, and iron it in place here. And I'm just going to do that all the way down both sides. Okay, so now that I have it all fused on, I can go ahead and get my top stitching on, and I'm going to be stitching on both sides of my placket. But see, since this is fused, I don't have to worry about pins. So I am actually going to start at the bottom, you know, violating so many social norms here. Yeah, I am. So I'm not doing a super edge stitch because I'm just using the standard foot that's on this machine here. And if you're ever wondering how to do a back stitch on a machine that has no back stitch, just take a couple stitches, raise the presser foot, move the fabric forward a little bit, and then do it again. And there you go. Okay, and so that's going to give me a little edge stitch here, and I'm going to go ahead and go up all the way around and also do this side right here, so that when I get done, this side I've already done, it's just going to look like that. It's going to be super, super sturdy. I don't need to worry about anything. It'll be all ready for buttons and buttonholes. Okay, so finally I have worked my way down to the collar. So I need to punch out the circles that go along with the sides. I'm punching out a circle on my center back seam also, just so I can mark it easier. One here and one here. There are notches on this side. That is the side that gets sewn onto the dress, and I am going to clip those notches. And wherever there was a little circle that I punched out, I am marking them on with my heat erasable pen. Now, on these, previously, I cut out a piece of interfacing and I fused it to one. I've got two of these cut out. And I'm going to be working with the piece that has the interfacing on it first. Okay, set this one aside. And this is going to be the collar facing. This will be the top collar. So the first thing it wants you to do is put a row of stitching straight across here as a single piece at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so with that done, you can see it in red. The next thing it wants you to do is press it down along that stitching line and then come back and trim it to 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to trim it first because I think that it'll actually help when I'm trying to press it so that it'll press easier. So I'm just pinking about halfway through. I don't think it's terribly critical that this is at exactly 3/8 of an inch. I just want it graded so it's at a different length than the other side will be, so it won't be quite so bulky. So now that I have it like that, I'm folding it this way along that seam line, and I'm going to press it all the way across. And of course I just ironed it, so all my marks disappeared, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and sew the two pieces together, and then I'll put marks on here again as I need them. So with this part folded under, I'm matching up my sides, and I need to sew it at 5/8 of an inch. This is a lightweight fabric. It's going to be fine. I'm just going to do it the standard way. 5/8 here, turn it, and back down that way. Okay, so now I am just going to clip around my corners, and also I'm going to clip every couple inches across this round part like this. Let me get this corner here. And you know what, just for that whole pinking mysticism, which means, you know what, you don't know exactly where the end of it lays, and the pinking lets it flex easier. So in addition to those little clips, you're taking this down. Now I am going to be needing to understitch this. Okay, so if you look on the little diagram, they're going to show you which side to understitch. The side that is not sewn to the garment is going to have the understitching on it, okay? All right, so after pinking it, I have flipped it right side out. I'm just kind of easing out these corners here. And we're going to be needing to understitch this so that it will lay nice and flat, all right? So looking at it on the inside here, according to their diagrams, the understitching is going to be on the side with the interfacing, okay? So before I sew this onto the garment, I'm going to do that, which means I'm going to get my foot. Like if this is at my sewing machine, I'm going to be pushing the seam allowances here towards this side that has the interfacing, just getting my foot in here as far as I can. And I'll be stitching along here. And yeah, you know, it might be even easier to look at it from the inside here. You want to make sure these are pulled out nice and flat. But you're going to be stitching it right about here, somewhere between a 1/16 and an 1/8 of an inch away from this seam line, on top of the seam allowances, on the side with interfacing. From as close as you can get into the corner here, all the way down to as close as you can get to the corner here. Okay, so before I can sew my collar on here, I need to put my marks back on. And these two outside dots should be right at the very edge of your fabric at 5/8 of an inch. These two circles here should be matching up with your shoulder seams, okay, those two. So, and I have my notches clipped here. So I'm going to start out coming up with where my center back is, so I can get that matched up too, which is going to be right here. A fresh battery in the camera, we're good to go. So I'm going to match up my center back on my collar piece, you know, keeping this free, with my center back on my dress. Put a pin there, and then come over here and match up where this dot is on my collar with my shoulder seam. Right about there, and pin it into place. And where the edge of this collar is should line up with where, remember we made this little L shape here? It should line up so that those two meet, like that, okay? So I'm going to pin that in place right here. Now this neckline has stay stitching all the way around it to keep it from stretching, but to make it easier to get the collar to lay nicely, I'm going to come in here inside this stay stitching and just make some little clips, and that'll help it to flex a little bit more and lay nicely. I will pin this other side also eventually. Okay, so with the little clips in, now it's going to be a lot easier to get all of these raw edges to match up here. I want to make sure my little seam allowances stay pressed open on the shoulder, so I'll put 2 pins there. And there are notches here that are matching up pretty closely, close enough. And right here, so the way I have this side pinned, I will pin the other side over here also. Okay, so it looks like this. Once I get it all pinned, I'm going to come back, you know, keeping this part free, and stitch straight across here at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so opening it up on the outside, looks good. I don't see any major puckers, which is good. Usually I like to sew it the opposite way, where I sew this side first and then the outside, but we're going with the instructions today. I know, unusual for me. The last thing they want you to do is, oh, I didn't show you, after I made my understitching, I pressed this edge. So before you sew it on, press your edge, okay? And you can see the understitching is going to pull all of the seams and everything towards the underside of the collar, which will look nice. This doesn't make any sense. This is the wrong side. This is the wrong side. Hang on a second. I want you to see why I'm having a little emotional meltdown here. And I believe it's because they had you understitched to the wrong side, all right? When the understitching is here on the side that has to be attached later to the wrong side of your fabric, okay, like this, and it shows it so that on the right side of the fabric you don't see understitching, right? So this is the right side of the fabric, no understitching visible. Right side of the fabric, no understitching visible. That's wrong. Unless you're going to wear your collar popped up all the time, and that's not how the pattern has. That is wrong, because as soon as you put your collar on, okay, it's going to get folded this way, so that what is on the bottom, this side, is actually the visible side. and you don't want your understitching to be visible. So on their little diagram here, they're showing a collar with no understitching showing, okay? So let me tell you, when you're following along here and it gets to the point where it's telling you to understitch, don't go by this diagram. You want to understitch all your seam allowances towards the side that does not have any interfacing. Okay, so yeah, this is going to drive me nuts. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it out. I know it's a minor thing and it just kind of looks like top stitching, but it's going to drive me nuts. So even though this is what it says to understitch it on the side that is loose, okay? And it says to leave the interface side loose. I'm not crazy. Don't do it that way. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this understitching out. I'm going to press this seam allowance towards the non-interfaced side this way, and then understitch it over here, okay? I will be back momentarily. Okay, so now this is how it should be. When you are looking at the inside of your garment and you're looking at the collar, you should not see stay stitching. It should be on this side, okay? So now that that is all done, what I need to do is come in here, tuck everything in, and this edge that was pressed, I'm going to do the same thing that I did over here, where I get a little piece of stitch witchery, tuck it in there, and fuse this on so I can make sure that this folded edge comes right over that. And then that way I can come on the outside right here and do a row of edge stitching, and that's going to catch all of this. So let me go over to my ironing board and I'll get some stitch witchery, fuse all of this on, you know, just like I did before. Come back here, stitch down along the edge at the very bottom of the collar, and then all we have to do is put on buttons and buttonholes. Okay, welcome to the next day, and this pattern, it just seems to keep going and going and going. But this should be our very last step, and that is getting these buttons put down the front. Now, the pattern, I believe, calls for 12 buttons, but I'm probably going to be changing that. And the reason is it has a button way up top and then this one, and I believe I will never button those two. I will start a button here, okay? And then I'm going to want one right here where that waist area is. And so I'm just going to get my fabric down here and respace it and figure out how I'm going to want my buttons to be placed based on where I'm actually going to use them. I'm going to be using little yellow buttons, and these are actually the very same buttons I used on that pastel plaid blouse last week. They're just yellow instead of pink, so how fun is that? All right, so let me go get my dress down here. We'll take a look at it. Spend a few minutes looking for this. I am in the middle of reorganizing my sewing room again, and I have a couple cabinets coming, and so in the meantime I've got stuff just sitting everywhere and it's kind of a disaster, but that's okay. Okay, so this is the very top of the bodice area where I'm going to want a button, okay? So I'm just going to put a little circle right with the center of where I want that button. And get this away. Right here where the waist is, where these two come together, I want a button there also, okay? So I don't know if you can see. Maybe I'll circle it. If I circle it, maybe you can see better. So there's a button here, and here is one here. All right. Now, with understanding that right around here is the apex, so it'd be probably a good idea to have a button around that area. I'm going to take my expandable sewing gauge here and see what we can do. So if I put a button here and one here, and I want 2 in between. That's going to be my spacing, okay? Let's see if I want more buttons. If I want to move this here, and I want 3 buttons in between, that will be my spacing. That looks a lot more secure to me. It's kind of excessive buttoning, but it's kind of cute. So I think I'm going to go with this. So just want to make sure I got it placed here. I'm going to put a little circle at each point where that should work, and then coming down below here. I'm not going to put buttons all the way down. I think I will probably go about to my knee level with them. So let me just move this down here. So maybe one more. Okay, so how many, let me count how many buttons this is. Ouch, didn't even pinch my finger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 buttons. So I'm basically losing 2, which are the ones that they wanted up here. So I think I'm actually pretty close. I'm not even putting their little buttonhole guide on here. I don't want to confuse the issue right now. But the buttonholes are going up and down vertically, and my buttons are approximately a 1/2 inch tall. So what I want to do is draw a line where I'm going to have the track of my buttonhole, and my width of this placket is 1.25 inches. Half of that should be 5/8. So if I line up my ruler, so 5/8 is on the very edge. Hang on. Let me do it on this side. I think it'll be easier to see over here. It's going to give me a track of where all the buttons can line up this way. So let me finish doing that down here. And again, this is my heat erasable pen, which should disappear. Okay, now since my buttons are a half inch from that little dot I made, I'm going to draw a line 1/4 inch above it. And by doing that, I should be able to center my button in that area. And that's going to give me the starting point where my buttonholer needs to work. And I'm still internally debating on if I should even attempt to use the button holder on my pinky machine or use it on one of the ones that I usually do. And I'm thinking I'm going to probably just use it on my 201 because I know it works there well. I've never used the buttonholer on a shuttle machine before. It probably would work because it's a low shank machine. I'm just not up to it today. I'm trying to get things done here. I've got projects going everywhere. So with this, I'm going to go ahead, set my buttonholer up on my machine, and get started making these. Okay, so I'm over here on my 201, and I gotta tell you, I love machines. I love playing with sewing machines. It's what I do. It's my hobby. It's my joy. I got over here and I just used this machine a few days ago making that plaid blouse. Okay, so I know that there was nothing wrong with it. I sat down and it wasn't working, and it drove me nuts, and I went through everything, the timing even. And then I realized, you know, start with the simple things. Start with the simple things. I looked at the needle, and instead of using a flat-sided shank needle like I should, and like I am now, I had one of those round shank organ needles in it, and the needle had turned so that the eye was in the front instead of on the side. And that was it. That was the whole thing. So I put in a different needle, made sure it was in the right way, and everything is good. So just to let you know, these things, they do happen. So I got my buttonholer set. I'm just going to start at the bottom for fun this time. Put my needle in at that cross point. I think someone's at my front door. Let me go see. Everything's fine. It's just my husband coming home. So, okay. So now I got it. My needle started at that little cross point. I'm gonna grab my tails here and just let her get started. And I'm just doubling around the top a little bit. Let me take a peek. You know what? I'm going to come all the way down the side one more time. Okay. And then I just can pull her out a little bit and move it up to the next spot, you know, giving myself enough thread. Pull this over and get her started again. I love these vintage buttonholers so much. As you know, they make great buttons. All right, so sticking my needle down where it needs to get to be started at that T, turning the little crank so that this part rotates to the very beginning of the circuit, setting it down, and going again. Okay. And I'm just going to do that all the way up. Okay, so now that all of my buttonholes are put in, I'm just going to come back with my buttonhole scissors and cut them open carefully. I want to put one button through just to make sure it fits, because that would be tragic if it didn't at this point, but yes, it does. Once I get it cut, just kind of run my fingernail around in there, pull out all the little loose threads that I can, and then trim those off so that they won't bother me later. And that's it. So I'm going to go down and do that for all of my buttonholes, and then once all that is done, I can just overlay it on the coordinating side here, like this, very carefully. Put a pinhole in the middle of my buttonhole with my little marker so I know what it is, and that's where I'll sew the buttons on. Okay, so I had to move my camera up on the porch because it's actually raining and I didn't want it to get wet. But final product, thank you very much. I am very pleased with this dress. It's not uncomfortable at all. The boning to me adds some definition. If I was doing the halter version or the sundress version, I would definitely do boning just because. And I think lining it it makes it feel more expensive when it's lined. It makes it feel more like a good quality garment when it's lined. And you know, it doesn't take that much longer to. So I only added buttons to this point. So yes, my knee is peeking out. You can add more if you want to, that's up to you. And I only started here. Sorry for touching my microphone. But I like it. Overall, I would give it a good thumbs up. I didn't see any problems really with the pattern except for that top stitching thing on the collar, and that's minor. That's a editing issue, but the pattern itself is good. So yeah, it's a great dress. Hope you like it, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Living my my bucolic life. Free every city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.